Alright guys, welcome into Formula 1 news. The chief engineer of Red Bull Racing and one of the only real senior members left that hasn't departed of that team over the last couple of months has admitted that losing Adrian Newey is going to be a major detriment to their team, saying of all the problems they currently have, Newey would likely know how to solve them. But as it stands, Newey's departure from the team and potential arrival to Aston Martin next season puts Red Bull in a tricky spot. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I don't mean to talk about Kimi Antonelli again, but we have to do it just real quick here because just further sources saying that yes, the deal is done. It's going to be a multi-year deal with Mercedes. Of course, as we said, that potentially puts George Russell in a bit of jeopardy if potentially Verstappen was to want to join and Toto has to make a decision as to which of two of those three drivers he keeps. And if he's putting Antonelli in now, he's not going to want to get rid of him unless he really underdelivers in his first season or so in the car. He's expected to be announced at Monza. There's a general feeling right now that Formula 1 is going to move away from having two Grand Prix in Italy. It seems likely that Imola might well depart. That's the general feeling anyway, that, I think we could keep both races. I don't really like Imola. The track is legendary and it's a great circuit in many respects, but overtaking is so difficult with this new generation of cars. The one DRS zone, I don't mind if Imola goes personally, but look, would I take Imola over a street track? I'll take an Imola, right? But there is a feeling that probably one of the two will go, and if one is going to stay, it's going to be Monza, isn't it, realistically? So that's the feeling anyway, that in 2026 and beyond, maybe it's only going to be one race in Italy, and therefore they're going to be able to get one elsewhere. Just a quick interesting update, you guys might have seen some talk on this lately, on the driver weight limit. So they're increasing the weight limit of the driver, plus like their helmets and their equipment and stuff, from 80 kilos up to 82 kilos. Now, it's not actually a massive deal in some respect. Okay, it's 2 kilos, but it is quite of a big deal for the drivers. It takes the minimum dry weight of the cars actually from 798 to 800 kilograms. So next year's cars are actually going to be heavier, marginally, than this year's cars. But that's because of the driver side. There's a feeling, which is understandable, that the taller drivers have always had a disadvantage, right? Because they're bigger, they struggle to fit in the cars more, the cars need to be as compact as possible, so fitting a taller driver in a car is a bit of a challenge. And if you're a taller driver, you're going to be heavier, generally, and it's difficult to reach the 70-odd kilos that you've got to be, in addition to the driver weight, the seat, the equipment, that type of stuff. So they're raising it up by a couple of kilos, and it might not be a massive deal, but it does mean that the drivers that can't help being tall, as Daniel Ricciardo points out, they can be the athletes that they want to be, in the sense that he says a lot of the taller athletes have to dehydrate themselves effectively in order to even make the weight, which isn't really an ideal scenario. So this, I think, is probably better. It means that the taller drivers don't have to suffer the consequences of having it to such an extent. It's only a couple of kilos, but it does mean that, either they can keep more water weight in or whatever's necessary to get over the line. And basically, Ricciardo's point was a bit more freedom to actually be an athlete rather than just be, a robot in the car that's trying to reach the number that is assigned, because you don't want to be overweight. You can be overweight as it stands, like you are allowed to be, but the issue is that the teams are going to be like, well, you're 82 kilos or whatever with all the equipment, and we can be 78, or you can be 80 in this case, as it was in 2024. So, that's a problem, because 2 kilos extra weight is going to be maybe a tenth or so a lap. We obviously have this discussion with George Russell's 1.5 kilogram underweight discussion, which we think was maybe gaining him over the course of a race distance a fair few seconds, right? Which of course is relevant, and the teams aren't going to be happy with their driver being overweight. So just a bit of a discussion point over there. Quickly on Ferrari, because we're going to get into Red Bull and their struggles lately. Of course, there's talk about where Ferrari are going to be next year. There's no doubt that the upcoming upgrade packages for Ferrari are massively important, because if they don't work, the team is in a really tricky spot. Next year's car is going to be an evolution for every single team of this year's car in many respects. 2026 is a brand new ball game, and therefore you've got to weigh up the fact, how much do you put into next year's car? How much do you put into the 2026 set of regulations? Even I think Alonso said that Aston Martin have to really consider and weigh that balance. They want to do as well as they can next year, but 2026, certainly for Aston, is really what matters. Whereas for Ferrari, that is also true. They want to hit the new regulations running when they hit the grounds, but also 2025, there's an opportunity for Ferrari to potentially win the championship if they get it right, given that Red Bull have obviously regressed. So Gundersteiner has a few words on Hamilton, really, whether, the decision is going to be good or bad. And Leclerc also saying how he's eager to learn from Hamilton when he is his teammate on what it takes to operate at a very high level on a very consistent basis, week in, week out, and, win championships, this type of stuff. I think Ferrari are also pretty keen to learn from Hamilton, his methods of working, the way that Mercedes were able to have that period of dominance, and also just firing up the team, because Hamilton is never going to accept anything that isn't the absolute best, and he's going to try and get the most out of the team. I guess the question is from the Hamilton side, whether, okay, sure, maybe Hamilton has no weaknesses, you can talk about qualifying pace in the later part of his career, whatever, but Ferrari have their weaknesses, right? I think this is the issue that Hamilton might have to deal with, is that Ferrari have their problems, and even though they might be somewhat reduced under Vasseur, it's not like they've entirely got away. So, that is a big debate to me as to what happens from the Hamilton to Ferrari side, how frustrated he gets, maybe with some of the radio communications that may or may not come through. McLaren, on the other hand, they've been looking good. They've actually tied their record, McLaren, over the last couple of rounds with 10 podiums in a row. The first time they did that was 12, on the last time they did that was 12 years ago, back in 2012. So pretty remarkable stuff between the two drivers, but of course they wanted more than just podiums, because out of these races they've won, two? One with Norris in Miami and one with Piastri in Hungary. Could have been Norris in Hungary, but of course the drama happened at that Grand Prix weekend. But let's talk about the Red Bull situation, right? Because there's been increasing talk over the last few days about the whole Max to Mercedes thing. Yes, you might say, I mean, come on, are we serious at this point? Like, Max isn't going there, they're signing Antonelli, but it's probably not for next year now. But for 2026, it's not out of the realms of possibility. Eddie Jordan, who of course is, surprisingly to many when this was actually confirmed, the agent effectively of Adrian Newey, negotiating the exit deal it seems that Newey has from Red Bull Racing, he says, I would therefore be anything but surprised if Max switches to Mercedes in 2026, effectively in light of the Newey departure, the Jonathan Wheatley departure, going over to Audi to be their new team principal, effectively, Mercedes' rapid rise. He sees an eventuality where Verstappen switching to Mercedes is not out of the realms of possibility. But big decisions like these, it's always going both ways, right? It's in addition to the pull factors, it's also push factors from the other side. And this is the concern I think that Red Bull and Christian Horner have, is to ensure that they don't push Verstappen away. But, there's been a few examples over the last few rounds which might tell you that, okay, there are actually a few reasons why he might want to leave. Even the events of Hungary certainly spring to mind. Everything that happened there, the frustrations on the radio, even with the strategy. Then after the race, the talk about that they'd heavily advised him not to stay up late in sim race. All of these factors must be coalescing to some degree. It probably won't be enough for him to leave for next season, but it could well be enough for him to leave for the season after, especially if he doesn't win the championship next year. He looks like an absolute nailed-on guarantee to win 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25, but that is far from guaranteed anymore. And the other day I asked you guys who's the favourite for next year's championship, and, the answers are all over the place. It's very difficult to say as it stands. So Pierre Wache's been talking about the Red Bull situation, and this is actually a comment from a while ago, a few days ago at the start of August, a week or so ago, because Adrian Newey gets the credit really for Red Bull's success over the last few years, and I think, to be honest, understandably so, there is a feeling that at least the suspension, which was a crucial reason as to why Red Bull was so good in 22 and 23, was entirely designed by Newey initially. They therefore avoided all of the porpoising problems that held other teams back, and Red Bull were able to make hay while the sun shines, as it were. So Wache says, look, it doesn't frustrate me that Newey gets all the credit. It's all about winning at the end of the day, but we've got 300 engineers to develop our car and make it faster. And Wache is now effectively the top guy over there. The interesting comment, though, was coming out of Paul Monaghan. So this is pretty interesting at Red Bull lately, right? They've lost lots of important members of staff. Newey is gone, arguably the most critical man to their success over the last few years, even more so than Max Verstappen, you could argue. And Jonathan Wheatley, their sporting director, obviously a bit of a controversial figure because of all the radio messages back in 2021, but he's going over to Audi to kind of head up their new project over there and manage that transition from Sauber and beyond. So Monaghan is their chief engineer. He's involved in that kind of, you've got Monaghan, you've got Pierre Wache, you've got Enrico Balba, you've got Ben Waterhouse, and these are some of the top names leading up the technical department at Red Bull. Strong technical department, no doubt about it, but it no longer has super consultant Adrian Newey, whatever you want to say. So Monaghan was talking about the testing, the fact that the other teams are catching up, it's very interesting still looking at the data from where they were at the start of the season, Red Bull, to where they are now. Even if you look at Miami, right, McLaren brought an upgrade that obviously propelled them forwards, but it's not like McLaren's upgrade was worth a crazy amount of time. Even McLaren said themselves their upgrade was relatively minor at the time, and all of a sudden since then it's been very competitive. So, there's been lots of questions on exactly why or how or if Red Bull have regressed substantially from the start of the season. Red Bull, of course, aren't going to say that. They're just going to say, oh, our rivals caught up. But the interesting thing was his comment on Adrian Newey, a man that he's worked closely with for many a year, but a man who apparently his advice was rejected and ignored when developing the RB20. And this is, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago now when this was first rumoured, that there were certain elements of the car that Newey wasn't happy with. Some of the features on the side pods, on the floor, those potential channels on the rear of the car that had been potentially taken from Mercedes. A few of those things Newey wasn't convinced were the right way to go, and but Red Bull decided, you know what, we know what we're doing, Adrian. We don't want to be reliant on one man, so we are going to take this route. And Newey was obviously potentially pushing for another route, and well, we know what has happened on the present day. Pretty much ever since the day that Newey announced his departure from the team, things haven't exactly gone to plan. And this is why Monaghan's words on Newey are potentially rather problematic for Red Bull, because Newey basically, Monaghan says on Newey, that he always knew how to solve the problems. This is the statement here that he came out with, saying that, look, if you look at our lap time as a yardstick, it's still a competitive car, and it's, the RB20 has, in some respects, the same strength as last year. It's just the other cars are closer, right? His argument is that last year's car was similarly good in terms of strength and weaknesses. It was just far better than other cars, and the issues that they had were less than the other cars had. I don't know if you can argue either way, because did last year's car have quite the same issues over the curbs than Verstappen and Perez complain about today? Not really. That's why there've been all these rumours about whether Red Bull have been requested by the FIA to remove something that was maybe a very much grey area spot from their car, but who knows? We're not going to be able to say anything more on that conclusively unless some sort of publication comes out with an analysis on whether or not that might be true. This, though, was the key quote on Newey, because with Newey's departure, Monaghan says, for me personally, it's a big loss. Now, it's pretty rare that you hear this so directly from at least a senior individual at Red Bull. Horner is like, well, it's life. He's moving on. Obviously, thanks for his contribution, but this is how it is. Whereas Monaghan is actually pretty, even emotional to some degree, saying, yeah, for me personally, it's a big loss. I really enjoyed our collaboration. I always liked his way of designing as well. He just wanted to make the car as good as possible, and wherever the ideas came from, he always knew how to solve the problems. And that's a pretty interesting assessment, really, because this is, of course, true about Adrian Newey, that he's rather good at designing cars. But also, when you come into an issue, when there's a problem that emerges, Newey will almost always be able to come up with the appropriate solution. Seems like the current Red Bull technical outfit doesn't, have that spark of genius, whatever you want to say, that Newey seems to have to be able to solve the issue. And the other thing for Newey is that because he's left, or because he's leaving, he's still part of Red Bull, but he's no longer working on the Formula One project as he was. So I'm not so sure Newey is in these meetings anymore saying, oh, guys, you just got to do this, that, and the other, and the car's going to be fixed. Yes, he still works for them, but he took a big step back from the Formula One project. He's still been in the paddock from time to time, which is kind of interesting, but I don't think that ever since his departure at the start of May, he's actually been working on the car at all, and it's not like Red Bull have some crazy upgrade package in the work. We're just going to turn around their season again. So, he basically says, a bit sad, Monaghan, from a personal point of view. He wanted to do something different anyway, so that's how things go. But this idea that he always knew how to solve the problems kind of implies on some level that the current technical team not exactly doesn't, but is having a harder time. So Monaghan then obviously comes back to the Red Bull party line and says, oh, we've got incredibly talented people. It's great to work with Pierre Wache. We're moving forward like this. We are still a good team. But doesn't necessarily take away from his comments on Adrian Newey. So this is, the question, right? Because people obviously rate Newey very highly. For very good reason, right? He's made and designed multiple championship-winning cars, and certainly when a regulation cycle changes or there's some sort of difficulty to overcome, that's when Newey is arguably at his very best. But teams have been discussing the possibility of either getting Newey or not. The general feeling is right now that he's going to go to Aston Martin. Ferrari, we think, said no, because he wanted too much power, according to Fred Vasseur in the team. Well, not according to Fred Vasseur, speculated to be what Fred Vasseur thought. We'll discuss a bit more in a second. And even McLaren say they're pretty happy with how things are going. They brought on Rob Marshall from Red Bull very recently as well over the last couple of years. Of course, Dan Fallows, formerly of Red Bull, went to Aston Martin a couple of years ago. So, you know, you look at these names, Dan Fallows, Rob Marshall, obviously Jonathan Wheatley, not exactly an engineer, but you know what I mean, and Adrian Newey, all departed Red Bull over the last few years. You know, Verstappen's got to be thinking about what that means for the future of that team. It's natural. It happened to Mercedes, and eras of dominance can't last forever. It's simply how it is. But if you're a driver, you don't have to stick with one team. You're allowed to move if the contracts allow you to, which, you know, potentially could be resolved if required. So McLaren are saying, oh, we don't really need Newey. We're pretty happy with our technical outfit, and maybe they're right to say exactly that. The feeling is, though, that he's going to go to Aston Martin because Ferrari, despite being willing to put the money up, Newey wanted Newey apparently to try and make the team in his own image, or construct the team from top to bottom in a way that he believes will lead to championship success, which is, you know, I think that Newey probably has a good idea what he's doing to do that. The issue is that if Newey comes in with those demands, then he effectively makes himself team principal, and Fred Vasseur is obviously not going to want to do that, and he's also not going to be so happy to see such widespread changes, you'd imagine, to the Ferrari outfit. So that's the rumour of what's going on over there, but very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments section below. Just to mention this real quick, I know we saw it the other day, but if you guys didn't, still thought it was kind of interesting. What if the championship began 7 rounds ago rather than began, you know, as it actually did plenty of rounds ago? And as we can see here, 116 points Max has scored over the last 7 rounds. Hamilton scored 115. Piastri has scored 114. So would be an absolute banger championship on our hands. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.